Marilyn Monroe died on August 5, 1962. The official verdict? Suicide. But the phone records from that night were subpoenaed years later, and they showed calls to Robert Kennedy's office. Those records then disappeared from the files. That's just the beginning, because the real story of Marilyn Monroe isn't about how she died. It's about what they did to her while she was alive. Stay with me. Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr. was born on January 17, 1942, in Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, in 1942, was a rigidly segregated city. The Clay family was solidly working class. His father, Cassius Sr., painted signs and murals. His mother, Odessa, worked as a domestic. They were not poor by the standards of Black Louisville, but they lived in a world that reminded them daily of the boundaries of their place. At 12, Cassius Clay's bicycle was stolen. He went to report it to a police officer, who happened to run a boxing gym in the basement of the Columbia Auditorium. The officer, Joe Martin, told the furious boy that if he wanted to fight whoever stole his bike, he should learn how to fight first. He did. By 15, Clay had won 6 Kentucky Golden Gloves championships. By 17, 2 National Golden Gloves titles. He trained with an obsessive discipline that set him apart from every other amateur in the country. But it was not just the discipline. It was something else, a speed of hand and foot that coaches said they had never seen, and a mind for the sport that was entirely his own. In 1960, at 18, he represented the United States at the Rome Olympics. He won the light heavyweight gold medal, defeating a 3-time European champion in the final. He wore the medal everywhere, to restaurants, to church, to the streets of Rome. He came home to Louisville and was refused service at a whites-only restaurant. He threw his Olympic gold medal into the Ohio River. What does it mean to win the highest honor your country can give you in sport and come home to a lunch counter that won't serve you? By 1953, Marilyn Monroe was the biggest box office draw in Hollywood. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire. The studio called her the Blonde Bombshell. She called it a cage. 20th Century Fox paid her $1,500 a week. They were making millions from her films. In 1954, she refused to show up to work. The studio threatened her. She didn't move. In 1955, she moved to New York, founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, and announced she would no longer accept the roles Fox assigned her. A blonde actress, in 1955, telling a major Hollywood studio no. The press called her difficult. The studio called her unstable. Nobody called her what she actually was, a businesswoman who understood her own value. She enrolled in the Actors Studio in New York. She studied under Lee Strasberg. Her classmates included Marlon Brando and James Deane. Strasberg later said she was one of the 2 most talented actors he ever taught. The other was Brando. She renegotiated her Fox contract in 1956 and won. Script approval, director approval, a salary increase of more than 1,300%. She also married Arthur Miller, the most respected playwright in America. It should have been the beginning of something. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Miller was under investigation by the House Un-American Activities Committee. The FBI opened a file on Marilyn Monroe. J. Edgar Hoover began monitoring her. A woman who had survived foster homes and a predatory studio system was now being watched by the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. And then came the pills. The psychiatric institutions of the 1950s and 60s treated anxiety, depression, and insomnia with barbiturates. Monroe's doctors prescribed them freely. Nobody connected the dots, that a woman with severe childhood trauma, under permanent professional and personal pressure, being medicated into compliance, was not being treated. She was being managed. The marriages failed. Miller divorced her in 1961. Her behavior on set became erratic because she was dependent on medication that nobody was properly supervising. The industry that had built her was now using her instability as evidence that she was the problem. And then, in 1962, she met the Kennedys. She had met John Kennedy before. The relationship with Robert Kennedy is less documented but widely reported. What is documented? In the months before her death, Monroe told friends she believed Robert Kennedy was going to marry her. He was not going to marry her. And in May 1962, she sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" at Madison Square Garden, in a dress so sheer it had to be sewn onto her body. It was the last great public moment of her life. 3 months later, she was dead. And here's where it gets complicated, and where it has stayed complicated for 60 years. But here's what nobody told you. The Los Angeles coroner ruled her death a probable suicide, based on a toxicology report and a 2-day investigation. 2 days. For the most famous woman in the world. Her psychiatrist arrived at the house before the police were called. The interval between his arrival and the official notification was never explained. A private ambulance service later claimed Monroe had died in their vehicle, en route to a hospital, and the body was returned to the house. The official record does not acknowledge this. When the Los Angeles District Attorney reviewed the case in 1982, 20 years later, investigators found that significant evidence had been lost, destroyed, or never properly collected. The phone records showing calls to Robert Kennedy's office were subpoenaed. Then they disappeared from the files. No one has ever been charged with anything. No one has ever fully explained the night. Here is what we know with certainty. Marilyn Monroe died of acute barbiturate poisoning. 14 drugs were found in her system. Her prescribing physician, Ralph Greenson, was present at the house before police arrived and was never adequately questioned about the timeline. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, changed her story about the night's events multiple times over the following decades. In a 1985 interview, she finally admitted that Robert Kennedy had been at the house earlier that evening. She had denied this for 23 years. The FBI file on Monroe, released under the Freedom of Information Act, runs to hundreds of pages. Much of it remains redacted. The sections concerning her relationship with the Kennedy family are among the most heavily redacted. 3 separate investigations have been conducted into her death. None of them have produced a definitive account of what happened on the night of August 4th. The most honest thing that can be said is this: the official story has significant gaps. The people who could fill those gaps either changed their stories, died, or said nothing. And the records that might have answered the questions are gone. But step back from the death, because the death has consumed the life. Marilyn Monroe was a woman of genuine and extraordinary talent. Some Like It Hot, still considered one of the greatest comedies ever made. Bus Stop, The Misfits. In each of them, she does something technically difficult that looks effortless, which is the hardest thing an actor can do. She was also a woman who read voraciously. Her personal library ran to hundreds of books. She kept notebooks of thoughts and observations that were published after her death, and revealed a mind that the blonde bombshell image had completely obscured. She wrote in one of those notebooks, "What am I afraid of? Why am I so afraid? Do I think I can't act? I know I can act, but I am afraid. I am afraid, and I should not be, and I must not be." That is not a line from a script. That is a woman talking to herself in a notebook. in the dark, trying to be brave. She was 36 years old when she died. She had been working since she was 16. She had never had a childhood, never had financial security, never had a relationship that lasted, never had a medical system that treated her as a person rather than a liability. And she had been, for a decade, the most famous woman in the world. If you know what it costs to be famous, really famous, not Instagram famous, but followed by cameras every day, written about in every newspaper, desired and discussed and consumed by a culture that has no interest in who you actually are, then you understand something about what those 36 years contained. If you don't know, watch the footage. Watch her eyes. Why does this still matter in 2024? Because the systems that consumed Marilyn Monroe are still running. The studio system that paid her $1,500 a week while making millions from her image. That system is called the entertainment industry, and it operates the same way today. The medical system that managed her anxiety with barbiturates rather than treating its causes. That system is called healthcare. And the overprescription of sedatives to women in distress is still documented and still under-examined. The political protection that kept the questions about her death from being properly answered. That is called power. And power has always protected itself. Marilyn Monroe fought for her own value at a time when women in Hollywood were not supposed to fight. She won, and then lost in other ways. The fight she started, other women finished. The contract negotiation that everyone called difficult paved the way for every actress who came after her and asked for script approval. She didn't get the credit for that. She rarely got credit for anything except her appearance. The woman who read Dostoevsky, studied Chekhov, founded her own production company, and renegotiated a studio contract in 1956 is still primarily remembered for a dress. That's the story history forgot, and it's worth remembering. The story doesn't end in 1962. The FBI files on Monroe are still being released, new pages declassified every few years. The 1982 DA investigation produced documents that have never been fully made public. And the people who were in that house on August 4th took most of what they knew to their graves. Next time, we go deeper, into the files, the witnesses, and the question that 60 years of investigation has never fully answered. Hit the bell. You won't want to miss it.